Good morning, everybody. I'm Tom. I work at Technolutionary LLC in the DC area, and we have a focus on medium enterprise companies and IT consulting.
And I'm Justin. I'm from Virtual Computers in New York City, and I focus on small business.
Justin and I work on very different projects, and yet they're so similar. There's so much similarity between the two of them. I have learned from what he does, and he has learned from what I do.
This is our story. It is called Into the Mirror. Real quick. If you need us on Twitter, tbridge at Justin Esgar.
IT benefits from scale and from modularity. That's a large environment and a small environment. No matter what size client you manage, albeit small, large, home, educational, or enterprise, everyone here can benefit from tools that allow for scaling and modularity. Deployment tools that a small business consultant, such as Justin, may think are too large for his client may actually save him some time and some money, just as small independent consultant thinking may work in one of my larger clients. We're here to show you that while you can spout tools like Puppet, Monkey, and Onion, Turnip, Banana, sometimes you just need to sit at the computer and hammer out the answers. Hey, Justin?
Yes, Tom?
If I said to you that you could save time by adding a Monkey deployment server for a 3-person company, would you do it?
Well, that's a tough question because, some of my clients are monthly maintenance clients, so possibly, but some of my clients are hourly clients, and I don't want to lose that money. Making the job easier for myself means less time on site.
But even your hourly clients, you may lose some hours up front doing the whole process faster, but you're going to get a happier client in the long run. And a happier customer is a returning customer. They see how rock star awesome you are by making everything happen on the fly. So they'll end up using you more, and you'll make more money that way. So what do big IT departments do well? Big IT departments have resources, personnel, and budgets that make a lot of small IT departments insanely jealous. How many people here are single practitioners? Yeah, how many people would love to have, a giant fleet of people that you could actually deploy on problems like that? How many of you actually are large IT administrators? And you guys work in staffs of multiple people where you've got actual time and resources that a lot of the small guys don't have. Whatever you call it, so what does this actually lead us to? Where does this take us to in terms of advantage? And that's, the first piece is documentation. If you've got a larger staff, you've got the ability to better document your resources. Whatever you call it, a wiki, a knowledge base, a master documentation structure, a huge Git repo of documentation files, these are the strengths of the big IT department. We're mostly past the time where all that knowledge is passed on through an apprenticeship model, even though that happens to a lesser extent. Oh yeah, this one-off switch that we bought in 1943 and still works, and this is the command structure to actually get into it. That does still happen, but we're largely past that point. And so we're largely past the point of apprenticeships and journeymanships in the IT environment. Good IT documentation means that if your director gets hit by a bus on the way to work tomorrow, your enterprise is still functional, even though they're working through their tiers, obviously. If you're not writing down everything you do, you're missing knowledge. You have to rediscover what you did, what past me did. And frankly, if past me didn't write down everything past me did, past me was kind of a jerk. So it's one of those places where, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So you've got to document every switch change, every router patch, every phone system change, every file share, every password needs to be contained in some documentation structure that is both secure and, that's both secure and available to your techs. Now that doesn't have to be every document goes to every tech, because we've all had that one tier 1 guy who maybe didn't need to know the password that he probably shouldn't have had. But it's about it's about increasing your bus number. Because that's the concept. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, my client can take over, or my partner can take over all of our operations, because that's how we've documented our entire structure. We've done this through various numbers of tools and in different pieces of the environment. Another important IT department concept here is standardization. And many IT departments pride themselves on a standard way of doing things. All the pieces come into place. Directory structures, OD80 binding structures, your telephony environment binds into your OD80 environment, and all of those things. Everything fits in its place. Included in Big IT standardization is that documentation process that we talked about. Those steps to roll out a new machine. It's been written down and clustered and standardized so that you can hand a new machine to your lowest tech, say, follow the process, get them out in the field, and away you go, and it's awesome. Small IT can set up an internal wiki or even Google Docs and write down what's necessary, even if it's paper. You've still got a record that you can work from in the small IT environment if you're really adapting to these tasks. Keeping track of your client's information, security aside, is really absolutely critical. Going back to our example of the new machine being rolled out, it's about known good states. It's about specific builds based on a number of factors. Joe user is in Department A. Department A gets the following deploy sets, and then you roll out from there. Lab B might get a wholly different separate set of information. And all of these determine their final placement. And using deployment tools can make this a hell of a lot easier for you when you've got a large amount of computers to deal with. But you can just use them as well for small amounts of machines. You've got small clusters, even within large IT operations, that can benefit from these places. If you think you've got if you're ever going to have to do it twice, merge it into your deployment environment. Standardization is about a known good state and consistent resources. When you've got more than 50 machines, or in a lot of cases more than 500, getting all your machines, no matter how temporarily, into an environment where they're working, you're setting your staff up for success. This has incredible value when you're working with just a few people or if you're working with hundreds. So let's talk a little bit more about deployment up here. Being able to move 50 people into new machines at once is about doing it fast and doing it well. This has applications when you're doing it for 3 people as well. And if you've got 3 new people starting tomorrow, if you can put them up on the network and get them going, you're going to save you're going to look like a rock star in front of your little client. So let's talk a little bit more about strategic planning. This is one of the places where Big IT does a lot better than small IT. We work with a lot of clients that now we know they're going to be around in 5 years. And so we can actually talk to them about doing strategic plannings. How many of you work for large universities? How many of you work for large businesses, people over 50? Okay, that's awesome. Because you guys know that your company's going to be there in 5 years. A lot of the smaller practitioner IT shops, it's still a small business. It's still a small enterprise. The changing state of the economy can actually rapidly draw down that business. And that's one of those places why we don't necessarily think about strategic planning in the long run. But it's something that you can plan for. And building sunset structures into your into your hardware plans and building growth plans with your clients can help them actually better manage their growth stream. Because if they know they're going to have to double their size, that's going to maybe more than double their IT expenditures. And so actually talking with them about budgeting and all of those things really makes a lot of sense. The life cycle of a corporation is something you can plan for that may not be true of your small business environment, but helping them adapt to that concept. There are a lot of small businesses that may want to stay small businesses. There are also a lot of small businesses that want to grow like crazy. And so those are places where you can help put those steps in early to reduce the growth pains in the long run. Another piece of that is ticketing and response. And this is one we all love to hate or hate to love. How many people in here use ticketing systems to manage their entire lives? Well, not their entire lives, but a lot of their support lives. And so it can be infuriating. There is nothing more enjoyable than waking up to a stream of help tickets. The idea that we can multi-track our support environment, keep good notes on user problems and trends, which is doubly important. You can spot problem users, you can spot problem applications, you can spot problem deployment strategies, based on your user trends in large ticketing environments. And that's an absolute must for any environment. And you have to be able to get them to use them to monitor your own support level in the case that you're ever called under the carpet for not being responsive or not solving people's problems. You have to use those ticketing environments to actually interact with your people so that you've got the data to maybe defend yourself against unfair allegations from your staff. We'll talk more about staff interaction later, because that's really important, because your users are why you're here at all. You're here to protect their data, you're here to protect their systems, but you serve the users, and that's important. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides. And then the other thing that Big IT has the advantage in is staffing, money, and resources. the George Lucas money fort on the right may not accurately represent the state of your IT department budget, but it's certainly something to consider when you have a lot of IT departments in small environments that are shoestring at best. Big IT usually has the ability where money rules. They typically have more money, more staff resources. Maybe not always. Not saying they also want to spend all of that money, which can be a tricky position if you're looking at a solution that costs maybe more than your budget's allowed. But as compared to the small environment, if you need to throw $1,000 at the new Mac Mini DNS server for Mike Boylan, that's usually not necessarily an issue, but in a small business, that's a paycheck for somebody. That's somebody's 2 weeks' earnings. And that's a big deal. Scale begets resources. And not all IT departments are like that. And I recognize that your enterprise org may see IT as a cost center instead of as a resource. And that can be a problem. We'll talk a little bit more about how to combat that, even as far removed as we often are from the CEO. So, where does big IT fall down? Because big IT falls down. Users in enterprise scenarios are often trained, don't do it, just call, don't bother trying to fix it yourself, call IT. And you get the conversation with the other end when I pick up the, when you pick up the phone on the other end, hello IT, did you reboot yet? And how many times can we talk about, if we're not giving our users the green light to help themselves, or to even give us better information, if we can't train them how to even just basically think about a problem, then we're hurting ourselves. And how many times are we focused then on other how many times do we get stuck in tactical response mode instead of being in strategic mode more often? And then we have the problems of effectiveness and complacency. Meetings really kind of, I don't know how many people in this room like meetings. I can tell you how I feel about meetings. And they really suck, don't they? I mean, you've got this block of time, and there's a bunch of pleasantries before we get started, and then there's a bunch of stuff that you probably weren't invited to talk about and really doesn't apply to your business or your day-to-day operational structure. But you've still got to be there. And you've still got to be in that environment. Now you cost you an hour. And that's an hour you could be prepping a package for deployment, or rebuilding some catalogs, or, reassessing your IT environment. So there are some places that big IT just can't act like a small independent consultant and refuse to attend meetings sometimes, or get routed around because that meeting requires budget of my time and they're paying you by the hour to be there. So it being a small independent consultant, you kind of get insulated from some of that meetings culture that exists. And solutions sometimes are figured out by throwing money at the problem, not necessarily freeing up an internal resource to develop that problem. And so we get these two kind of twin problems of being ineffective because we're stuck in meetings, or we're actually end up complacent because we're confident that we can always throw money at the problem and solve it that way. So I kind of feel like those two kind of go together. And then there's another problem where we end up shackled by a C-level person. How many people here have administrative policies, like an email signature that gets appended to every email that you send that's like a paragraph long in legalese? Or more. And I saw several hands go up. I mean, so those are the kind of decisions that get taken out of our hands, where they may not technically be necessary, and we are definitely impacted, but we get an administrative policy that comes down from the top, where we're not allowed to participate in the decision-making process that leads up to that point. And so oftentimes we end up with policies where we get to be the bag man for upper management. And that can be a really frustrating place for your users because I got a policy, I got to do it. And that can be a frustrating environment. And so, I mean, that's kind of leads to, the double facepalm that we see up at the front, because sometimes one facepalm just isn't enough. So, Justin, what do small IT vendors do well?
So for someone from small IT, we have a lot of differences, obviously. The first one I want to talk about is MacGyver IT. I heard this story one time where this guy, after Hurricane Katrina...
Hey, wait a second.
Wait, hold on. He took a dial-up modem and he hooked it up to a Netgear router.
Dude.
What?
I told you this story. I did that.
So Tom actually took a dial-up modem and he hooked it up to a Netgear router. You can find this on his Wayback Machine. What happened was, without internet, he took what was available and he put it together to give internet to his office. And this is what we call MacGyver IT. I kind of feel like MacGyver, except he has a way better hairdo than I do. Who here has a 3G USB plug-in card for their laptop? Great. That plus an iMac with internet sharing becomes a Wi-Fi router in a pinch when you lose, your cable line in an office. So the ability to think on your feet and use whatever resources are there for that smaller environment, we have to be able to be creative. Scant resources. Sometimes we just really don't have the budget to do what we need to do. Sometimes we can't just buy new machines. So what do? We take a machine that's out of production and we just reuse it for an old server. We have this machine, it doesn't run the new Photoshop, great. We're going to turn it into a deployment server, or a wiki server, or hell, even a time machine backup server. And the last thing is user flexibility. If title dictates behavior, then money dictates logic. 98% of my users understand that not everything can be done, and most of them are flexible enough that if I give them a temporary solution to fix whatever the problem is, they're usually happy. And while I should still give them an actual solution, they're usually fine with that. And eventually, I should give them the final solution, but sometimes I don't. So where do small IT like me struggle? Well, number one, obviously, smaller size is a slower response. The worst part is when I have to balance two people in separate areas, both with problems. If I'm at one client and another client tells me there's something going on, it's on me to balance who's got, the bigger fire. And usually I'll email them back and be like, okay, look, your message has been received. I'll be there shortly. And the thing is, while I'm working with the client I'm at, the other client's sitting there, waiting for me to show up, not working. And if they're not working, they're not making money. And eventually then they'll say, well, I didn't make any money this month, so I can't pay you. And then, it just travels down the river. So it's a hard thing to balance, be able to do the two. Smaller budgets with my clients equals smaller solutions. The best thing ever is when you go into an office and the CEO goes, all right, listen, this is what we want. We want VPN, we want home access, we want, time machine backups, we want offsite, we want in-house email. And I'm like, all right, what's your budget? And they go, $400. I'm like, all right, well,
he's not kidding.
I'm like, you can't even buy an iPad for $400. So let's think about how we can make this work. So we have to be able to work money around in such a way that we can stretch every last dollar to get it to work out. And last, different accountability structures. I don't know about you guys, but for me with the smaller companies, it's much harder for a owner of a company to fire their IT guy than it is to just fire an employee, because we hold the keys to their kingdom. The fact is, short of me getting into a fight with them, I have all their knowledge, right? Because their job is just to run the company. So if something goes wrong, they call me. But if they wanted to get a new IT guy, I've already accustomed all the users to knowing how I work, and I understand how they work. They're okay with our process and whatever it is. Bringing in someone new, there's going to be that time where how did I phrase that?
It's an adjustment period.
The adjustment period, thank you. The adjustment period that they just don't want to have to deal with. So, there's that level there where I'm now the guy that everyone has to call on, and it's become somewhat of a struggle because now everybody's calling me from within the company.
So what do we do to fix this problem? How do we benefit from the who knew? Jamie Lee Lewis could play that one. Taking me off track here, Justin. It's all good. So what do we do to fix this? How can we apply the pro-organization mentality to small IT? And the answer is a lot of that is reusing your resources. And if you build something once, you have to be able to build it again. And that means documentation, saving copies of, VMs that you're working with, and deploying in a modular function as much as humanly possible. If you build a monkey reposado VN, then save a snapshot of that right out the gate before you even touch it and configure it again. So then you can reuse that function again and again and again. And I was going to say, thanks to Jamf, you can add a NetBoot SUS server in a VM without having to spend a lot of time on that. Use your documentation structures to build deployable objects. So once you've built something, that's again your snapshotted VMs, that's your documentation structure, that's your script library, that's your GitHub repo of basic first boot objects that aren't necessarily configured for the full end user yet, but they're frameworks that you can begin from. And then, a second part of that is training your people. And that's not just your IT people, that's your staff. And learned helplessness is bad juju. If you have to deal with people who are afraid to touch it or afraid to even, try and figure out what the problem is without you standing there, you may be costing yourself time and your company resources in part of that. So, the other thing to think about is share. Share. How many people in this room have GitHub repositories that are public and available for others to see? This should be a lot more hands in the future. Being able to share resources with other parts of the IT world are absolutely critical. The Mac Enterprise list is awesome. The IRC channel is awesome. Being able to share your resources and share your solutions is more important because we all kind of get uplifted together at that point. So thank you for the people who are sharing their repos right now. That is awesome. You are heroes in the IT world, even if you're not recognized for it more than just here. So, but then how do we apply the pro-user, small IT mentality to big IT?
So one thing is you want to reuse all your resources. That Netgear modem thing only worked because those tools were still there. Instead of just throwing everything in the trash, you have to use what's available and reuse them. Push things to their limits. You may have a machine that's, like I said earlier, is out of production. Maybe the hard drive's dying. Well, it's $150 for a hard drive. Throw it back in there. Push it all the way till it's no longer good, dead to the wall, then throw it out.
When the magic blue smoke lets out, that's when it stops being useful. But that's it.
Also, bigger isn't always better. The CEO always wants, I want the fastest iMac with the greatest stuff and blah, blah. And then when that breaks and he has to go work on a backup machine that doesn't have all those bells and whistles, he's going to be super mad at you, right? So a standardization within the units that are in the small business usually helps. That way all the users kind of have a base idea of what to expect out of their actual computers. If the CEO's computer is running, let's say, slow, everyone else's is also running slow. Everyone's kind of on that same baseline. Also, big thing, don't be afraid to ask for help. It's okay to show a little bit of weakness and say, look, I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out, and here is how I'm going to do that. Okay? There's that great, however you want to say it, meme, whatever, where it says what an IT consultant does, and it says what I really do, and there's just a picture of Google, right? Because that's pretty much all we do. There's times all the time where a client emails me, and I write back, and they're like, you're brilliant. I'm like, no, I'm not. Google is, because I looked it up, because I don't, you know what I mean? So,
and that applies to standards too.
Yeah.
How many people here have actually gone and read the DNS RFC now? So put your hand up, Mike. Come on.
Raise your hand.
Yeah. But yeah, I was going to say there's so much information out there that you can apply and reuse out of that space.
Right. And the last thing is, if a tool doesn't exist that you need or that you thought of, go get it built. There's no reason why that can't happen anymore. Chances are that if you need this tool, someone else needs it also. And there's a great opportunity there for people. And if anyone here knows me, I'm a big fan of getting this stuff done because I'm also a huge fan of outsourcing. If you don't know how to write the tool or get the tool built, you can find someone who will do it for you. Now, obviously, this presentation isn't on outsourcing, so if you want to talk about that, I'll talk to you after. But if you think of something that, my business can use this to work that much more efficiently, or my client's business can use this tool, there's going to be another business of a similar manner that can use that tool also. So go get these tools built.
So let's talk a little bit more about another topic that's near and dear to the hearts of all environments. Big IT says lock the users down, make it so they can't do anything. But we fight for the users, right?
Well, small IT says we typically don't have that choice. Making a user a non-admin means we'd be sitting there 24/7, when we try to install a printer. So we actually fight for the users.
Well, who's right?
Well, both be right.
We can both be right. We can empower our users. Mr. Keeley's session earlier, if you didn't catch Sam Keeley's 2-time session, the only session given twice here today, catch it on video, because that's what it's about. It's about taking away the things that your users would never ever need to change without taking away their abilities to do what they need to get their job done. They could be allowed to install apps themselves, or you can actually allow them to use the App Store in some cases to buy personal resources, or to apply other app solutions from outside your enterprise environment, and make your environment a better place. The App Store is a bit of an opportunity. It is a bit of crisis and danger for your organization, and that's something you don't want to step into blindly. But you can't just rule it out because it might never be useful, or because we might never own what comes out of that process. You have to be able to use what you give your users the tools they need to get their job done. And if that's something that you're not providing, think about why that is. Users can also be taught to apply checklist of things to, a basic set of, I hate to use the word like shibboleth that says, I know what I'm doing. But you can teach people the basics of, I don't have an IP address, so that's why I'm not on the network. The red dot's on the login screen, so I can't log into my network user. Things along those lines. Spending a little bit of time with your users to actually give them the tools to troubleshoot their own machine engenders responsibility on their part. And if you have users that feel responsible for their own environment, at least a little bit, if they can take that responsibility, that takes it off of your plate and lets you actually engage with them on a better level. And it gives them better tools, because no one wants to be the guy who says, did you restart it? Because how many people here have Comcast for their internet at home? How many people have ever had trouble with their Comcast internet at home? Do you have to call in? And the first thing, you make it 20 seconds into the call and say, I have no upstream internet. And then they say, did you restart the router? Because you've already restarted the router because you're a responsible person. You know that that's the part that's broken. And so if you can get your user to that point, you can take that out of the equation. And you can say, okay, we've got a bigger endemic problem here. And that's what lets you engage more quickly and find the solution without having to wait 3, 5, 10 minutes for a reboot. So I was going to say it frees you up to kind of solve actual problems. So the other thing that we also do is we also fight for the master control program. We don't just fight for the users, because your data is your lifeline and your users control your data. How many people just cringed a little bit at that statement? You have to build systems that prevent your users from losing a monstrous amount of your data when they're acting on their own. They're not going to call IT with every random shutdown, or at least you hope they don't. And that means you're going to miss something at some point. And that means a hard drive's going to die. And that means you're going to have a USB key that might have had all of their data on it that might corrupt. These are things that happen. So if you're putting in governors, you're also putting in seat belts. And that's the most important part about that. You have to back up. You have to back up. And if you're not using a constant flow backup engine, maybe it's time to ask yourself why you're not. And there are acceptable answers that say, yeah, I really don't want to do that. Some of them have to do with, money. Some of them have to do with data privacy. Some of them have to do with storage requirements and things along those lines. But it's not just about backup that's the problem. Not all user restrictions are bad things. It's about data security. We've seen a lot about File Vault 2 disk encryption over the last couple years. We've seen a lot of stories about the IRS guy who left his laptop out in public with a whole bunch of unencrypted client data at that point. Citizen data left out in the public. And if you're not using, a profile-based system, system destruction command, or if you're not using File Vault 2, you're on the news the next day. And no one wants to wake up in the morning and see the headlines about company Y lost a whole bunch of client data, or customer B, left his laptop out and we got all our stuff stolen by a competitor. Sometimes you don't end up on that 11 o'clock news. Sometimes it's worse. So good IT is about exception handling. We're not here for everything working right. We're here to handle the situations when things work just wrong enough. It's about being ready for the person who dumps the entire coffee on their laptop a day before their massive sales presentation in Germany. It's about being ready for the person who leaves their company iPad sitting on the table here and walks out of the presentation room. Because you got to be ready for that. Because if you're not, if you're caught sleeping, then you have bigger problems, much bigger problems. So let's talk a little bit about what it means to be user-centric IT. Because that's what I think that our argument here is that we're talking about a user-centric focus like we might see in a small business environment, but we're also talking about that backed up by massive data systems that we get to control and impose regimes of control upon. We need to focus on what a user's needs are. These are what a user's needs are. They need a stable environment. They need a clear systems architecture. They need education. We need to be involved in their day-to-day, if we're not already. And we need job security because we'd all like to continue to do this. And so a stable environment is where we're going to start. A stable environment is very, very straightforward. A user needs to know their data is safe no matter what, and a user needs a machine that can interface with that data and interface with your systems of control in a very straightforward platform. That means they need to access central services that you manage and control, and that means they need to be able to not render their laptop inert by accident, at least permanently. Although if they let the magic blue smoke out, you're kind of in a tough position. Focus on stability, and you get to earn the user's trust. Earn your user's trust, you earn their respect, and then we solve the Nick Burns problem that we have as a profession.
Also, we need to have a clear systems architecture. We need to be able to draw a line where the computer belongs to who and the iPhone belongs to who, right? The computer is the company's and the iPhone is yours. They need to understand where that delineation response, and then you're going to set yourself up for success. The admins can assert responsibilities over like system or Apple updates, patching, backup, and make it clear so that way they can worry about it so you can understand where the boundary settings are. Draw that line in the sand, and then the users even like those boundaries, even though sometimes they do cross it.
So the other piece is frequent education. And I'm not talking about hour-long seminars. We talked about meetings before. Who's got time for another hour-long meeting where you're going to learn like 50 million little things that your IT guy thinks is important, but you probably think are kind of boring and lame, and you're going to fall asleep, and it's going to be terrible. Switch your education model up so that you're teaching your user one good thing at a time, and you're commanding 5 or 10 minutes of their time. You can cluster this in with other meetings. You can cluster this in as a brown bag lunch, beg, borrow, and steal that time from other departments and other contexts, and you're going to be showing them that using their computer is critical to their job function, even if they don't think that. We know that that is the case. We know that their interaction with the systems is absolutely critical. Otherwise, they wouldn't have them at all. So the idea here is switch your education model up. We found that adding a 5 or 10 minute, lesson to the front or an end of a meeting can be a great way to reach a large number of people you wouldn't normally touch and give them important little pieces of information that you can build into a bigger whole. You start it brick by brick. You are building their education as computer users in a brick by brick fashion. Talk about a 5-minute, this is how you change your password. This is what makes a really good password. This is why it's important you know your password. This is maybe something about two-factor authentication. This is maybe something about, how to diagnose whether or not you're on the network or not. Those are things that can be taught in 5 and 10 minute chunks. And if you build engaged users, you're going to have a much better opportunity. One of the other things that we want to talk about is building good consequences for calling IT. The last thing we want is more Nick Burns, where he comes up, move. And you've got to be able to engender users' trust. And that you have to be able to do something other than shove them out of the way the second their computer starts acting in a way that's different than they might have expected. So let them drive when you're talking with them. Don't just immediately ARD into a machine or Casper remote into a machine or talk to them about what they're seeing. And you can observe their screen, but you let them drive. Let them try and solve the problem as well. And so at that point, you're engaging them on their level. They're feeling like they have control over their machine instead of some, central system that's going to control their entire environment. And that's important. So you can dive in eventually and basically be like, oh yeah, I see you're missing these 3 packages. Do you mind if I just quickly take over and just pow, pow, pow? And then suddenly they're back in order again. So you still have the magic buttons to do it, but if it takes you 2 minutes longer and they feel better about the interaction, you're going to have a happier environment in the long run. Earning the trust of your users is absolutely critical to a good user-centric IT department. And the last thing that we have to talk about is a little bit of job security there. If you're not serving them, they're planning to get around you. And that means they're not involving you in those decisions. And so at that point, you're almost irrelevant to the entire architecture as well until you're recovering something from backup. So if you're more engaged in your user's environment, you're building yourself job security. So yes, we've got a couple of things here that really are the representations of that user-centric IT environment. And they are, an early warning system that kind of helps you, help your users. That leads to fewer problems, which means they work with you and not against you all the time. Trained users tend to break things less, in our experience. While this is a trend that we've seen, it's not always the case. But if you train a user to use the self-service help desk in Casper, for example, you've got something that actually, helps you build together good tools. And better users say, oh yeah, I think what I'm hearing is blah. And it's click, 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 click. Then you know to shut down the machine. You shut it down right now. Go grab the hard drive, pull it back an image. If you have to, do data protection or data recovery to grab stuff off of there. But a trained user understands what really is a problem versus what is a problem with understanding how to use their computer. And that's a time saver in the long run.
We also have better early warning systems, both in small and large consulting. There are great tools that are out there that let us know when things are about to go wrong before the user knows, right? It's a wonderful thing where you can go and replace a hard drive or know that something's going to happen to the computer before they get that spinning beach ball of death. There hasn't been a time where I've been backed up a machine, but knowing that the high machine hasn't run, gone to the client and said, hey, let's back up a machine right now and replace the hard drive, or even back it up right before that hard drive just stopped working. Make you look like a hero, and that ensures your job security.
Sure. And then you've got other things like SNMP, pingdom, which is my favorite piece. I have a pingdom script for every client we touch. And so sometimes your phone lights up like a Christmas tree, but that's when you know that your client is having a problem at midnight, so that you're ready to reroute yourself there first thing in the morning. So that you start your day in their network closet fixing their problem. And they're like, we didn't even know we had a problem. Well, you did, and that's why it called me. And so those are the kind of, things that you can do. SNMP traps, if you're not already familiar with SNMP, probably now is a good time. You can spot switch throughput problems. You can spot, bad cables even, essentially with a properly diagnosed SNMP trap. So those are the kind of things that you've got available to you in both large and small IT to kind of work in those environments.
We also want to work with you and not against you, right? As IT people, a lot of times users think that we're trying to work against them. We're just here to get our job done and move along. But we're not. We're here to work with you. We want to help your business grow. In small IT, our goal should be to help your business grow, but to be honest, it's not, right? Our goal, to be honest, is to make money. That's what it is. Whereas in larger IT or maybe education, your goal is to build a better infrastructure, which then would in turn generate more money for the company you're working for. So while we operate under the guise of we're here to help your business, everybody kind of has that secret handshake knowing that what we're all really here for. But in either case, we are here for you, despite our true intentions.
Right. And then there's the other important part of that, and that's, how do you keep your job as an IT consultant? You keep your client happy. How do you keep your job as, if you've got a pissed client, you're going to end up fired. You're going to end up looking for new clients. That happens. There's no other way to explain that. It's just the way it is. I mean, would you keep an unruly employee? Would you not fire the person who's late or talks back? Well, probably not, unless they have tenure. So, I mean, there are other factors in larger organizations that can play against this. And so, yeah, you are going to have some combative relationships out there. But if you keep your users happy and get out of their way when you can, and train them up on what they're doing, you can build yourself a piece of job security in doing that. And that's incredibly valuable. It's not something we talk about a lot in our environments, is that we're here to keep the systems working. Not true. We're here to keep the users working the systems. And that's incredibly valuable for us to recognize, is that our end clients aren't the computers in the server room. It's the users in front of every desk. And sometimes that can get lost. And sometimes that your corporate environment is going to be like, well, this, how many of you seen the video? The website is down. I was going to say that's a classic case of, I'm not serving the users, I'm serving the machines. Because I was going to say the user doesn't know what he's doing. He's talking about the wrong thing. We had somebody email us this morning, literally this morning, to say, oh yeah, we got a new person starting on Monday. They need admin rights on the server. What he meant to say was, I need admin rights on the following 3 file shares and the wiki server. So, I was going to say that was a place where user education can come and benefit you in the long run.
So, what do you do if you're stuck? Well, first, you need to understand the problem. We, as IT folks, are logical thinkers. And while the answer is usually DNS, there is actually a path to follow that needs to be done. And I'm gonna give you a great example, and I have no problem spouting out my own weaknesses here. But I had a client last month or whatever it is, and she was telling me that her mail app wasn't doing the recently used addresses. And I opened up her address book and I noticed the groups weren't working properly. So I asked her a couple of questions. I took the V cards out. I blew out her address book. I brought them back in. Everything's working. Great. A week later, she calls me up. She says it's happening again. And I said, all right, maybe it's a deeper problem. I wasn't even thinking about it at that point. I stopped asking questions. I made her a new user, and I copied her data in, and everything was working. And a week later, it happened again. And I was like, you know what? Let's kill an ant with a nuclear bomb. We wiped out the whole machine. I copied her data back in, and it was working. And then a week later, she called me, and it happened again. And I was like, ah. And what happened was, I didn't actually understand the full problem. So I went back, and I talked to her, and I said, where is this address book from? And she's like, I click, and I say, recently address. I actually found out, not from her, but from her boss, which happens to be my wife, because she had to tell me when she got home, because the girl, is that she actually inherited this address book from the employee that was at that computer beforehand. Now, they're not a monthly maintenance client, so the owner of the company is kind of cheap, so he doesn't want me to come in and do whatever. So she's still sitting at a computer with the wrong home user. And she inherited this. And what happened was, it was actually the address book data was corrupted. Right? So I didn't actually understand the full problem. So we wiped out all her contacts. She's an accountant's assistant, so I didn't really care about her 200 contacts. And things have been fine. So you have to really understand the problem and follow the right path in order to get to the solution.
Right. But it's not just a matter of understanding the problem. You have to understand what they're asking for. I was going to say, you have to understand the solution that is desired out of this entire environment. It's one thing to, tear down and rebuild the entire network because someone says they're having trouble. But if you don't know what they actually mean by what the solution is, you've spent all of this time restarting the web server while, they actually meant something else entirely. And so it's important to actually talk to the person that you're actually looking for so that you say, what is the end result of this problem that you want? Because they're probably not going to say it in the same way that you need to hear it. And so, some of that is going to be asking the right questions. And we'll talk about more here in just a second.
Take a break, man. Go take a walk. If the solution doesn't come to you right away, it's probably not going to. Stop banging your head against the wall. It doesn't work. Go do yoga, go to the gym, do something. Just get away from the problem, computers. Just do something else.
It's important sometimes to actually take a pause and to step back. And it's different, obviously, if you have a Kit Kat. It's different if things are on fire and you've got a mission critical environment. So, but we're talking about the problems that are really, really peculiar. You're not going to solve them just by hammering against it over and over again until your fingers are raw and your eyes hurt. So take a break, stand up, stretch, walk around the building. Sometimes you're going to need that. We forget to do that. We forget to take that break.
There's the
and then you see that you're missing a semicolon at the end of line 4 of your script, and that's the problem the whole time.
There's the 20, I think it's like the 20-20-20 rule. It's like every 20 minutes you should look somewhere at least like 20 feet away for 20 seconds to like rest your eyes. If you're staring at terminal for that long, do that. Otherwise, when you go to sleep, you will think you're Neo. And it's not good.
So that takes us to our final solution, which is actually asking good questions. This goes back to Justin's client with the address book. Ask the right questions. If Justin had asked if the address book was the user's, or if she'd inherited the data source from someplace else, maybe the time wouldn't have been wasted wiping her computer, other than saying, oh, it doesn't work. Well, how did you get here? How did we get here? Ask the open-ended questions that don't have a yes and no answer. You're going to spend more time hearing your client's life story. That's not a bad thing. And you end up coming to the place where you've got good answers because you understand the context they came from. And that is absolutely critical. So don't ask the questions, what were you doing? Did this work yesterday? Blah, 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 blah. The last thing you want to be is that guy who's like, oh, it's clearly your fault. What did you do? What were you running? What was going on in the background? How much email did you get yesterday? Is that why your Outlook database is corrupt again? You got another 4 gigs of email yesterday? I mean, these are the kind of things that we have to deal with. So asking good data-based, open-ended questions are how you get good problem solutions, because you understand the problem and you understand where you're going with the solution.
Does anybody here know the difference who doesn't know the difference between an open-ended and a closed-ended question? Just real quick. Right? Closed-ended questions are ones that are only answered with yes and no. And an open-ended is like a why or how. So if you're getting yes-no answers, you're doing it wrong.
Sometimes yes-no questions. Is it on?
But
is it plugged in? That's a question that you do eventually have to ask, no matter how many times you don't want to.
All right, you don't have to write these down because you'll get the slides later, but these are some really, really good links. The first one is the Phoenix Project, which is actually a book. I know it's weird. It's a book, but you can get it in e-ink, so you don't actually have to touch paper. Yeah, thank God. Actually, it's a really good book. It's about DevOps and IT. It's a fictional story based loosely on a real story that someone who was a mid-manager IT at in a large firm was called into his CEO's office at 9 a.m. and got promoted to be the CTO, even though he didn't want it. And then he goes back to his office and he's setting up, and 6 hours later he gets a phone call from the CEO. The CEO goes, "Come into my office." He goes, "All right." He goes into his office and he goes, "We're 6 months behind on the Phoenix project and it's your fault." And he's like, "I've only been the CTO like 6 hours, man. How is that possible?" And it's his story about how they break through the favoritism in IT and how they get through the ticketing system. And it's really like an interesting look on things, and a breakthrough. Very philosophical. Obviously there's no names of tools or anything mentioned, but it's a great read. Also the next one, the Manifesto for Agile Software, that's a one-pager. Just go to their website, read it. It's how they stopped like messing around and they kind of broke everything down into the right tools and they went what we call lean.
Yeah, and speaking of lean IT, McKinsey's one-pager, or it's a short white paper, it's a couple pages long, on lean IT and how to apply those resources across your business is a good guide to adapting the small business IT model to a larger environment. And then lastly, my favorite book of the previous decade was Esa-Pekka Himinen's The Hacker Ethic and the Spirit of the Information Age. And it talks a lot about where you come from when you're building information-based solutions. It's a little harder to find in print now, but I think there's a good ebook for it. I keep a hard copy of that one because I love it so much. So that one's worth your time.
This last link, with its really awesome graphic, it's from VentureBeat. It's a story about how to start trusting users, because as we grow in IT, more and more users are coming with the latest technology in their back pocket, and how we deal with it. It's just online, quick read, good article.
Well, that's it for us. I'm Tom.
And I'm still Justin.
And this has been Into the Mirror. We have some time for questions, so we'll open up the floor. Yes?
Just a really...
Yeah, I'll come. Well then.
I can be loud.
I lost my mic. All right, well then I will have to answer it because there's no like. It's Prezi. That's.
My question is much more.
I think it is on. It's just the mic is really for the back.
No, there's no.
Is there a button on the bottom? We're clearly in IT.
My question is a bit more, and this has been really helpful, and I'm hearing a lot of things. In education, you do action research, and I did an action research about my IT desk, and it was a lot of fun. There were a few tears. But what I'm wondering is, I get small and I get big, but I'm in a 15-person shop that supports maybe 2,000 on-site and 8,000 off-site.
Okay.
Kind of, and off-site, it's not like we're working on their computers. It's email, it's
right.
student records and things like that. Conceptually, from this framework, what do you guys think works for that?
Getting a raise.
So congratulations, you're big IT.
Yeah.
Whether you thought you were or not. With 15 people supporting 2,000 on-site users and 8,000 off-site users, you're what qualifies as large IT. And so working in those models, if you're supporting primarily the systems that back end to them, and not necessarily supporting their client desktops. Building user-centric IT practices is much more straightforward because you're controlling their user experience, not necessarily through your big systems. You're not necessarily controlling their day-to-day environments. So user testing is really, really helpful. UI testing is really, really helpful. So if they're interacting with like an email system, that's less critical, that's less your job. But if you're supporting like a banner database or student record database and things along those lines, if you're building those solutions in-house, spend the time on usability testing. Spend the time on engagement structures with your users, focus groups, beta testers. That's how you engender their buy-in because you're taking input from them. And you're basically saying, we met with our user committee and this is really what they wanted. Now you kind of have to filter that because not every, I mean, my wife works for a large organization that does membership communications, I think is probably a good way to put it. They have 50,000 or 40,000 members and they do communications to those environments. But they also have a website that needs to be user tested and usability tested. So spend the time on thinking about your users' roles in your environment and focusing on them at least in part. You still have, data retention jobs that can't be co-opted. Data retention, data security, and things along those lines. You can't compromise those lines, but at least you can think about how can we get around that, or not around that, but how can we adapt those concerns to our users' needs?
I would add on to that just like the 8,000, let's call them offsite, are they, because you said you're in education, are they, like what kind of users are they?
We recently went in through a process. I used to just have to support kind of on-site users, and occasionally it was an alumni, I forgot my password.
Right.
We recently re-engineered our system, so not only am I supporting incoming students who actually may or may not come to my university at the total of...
Are you higher ed?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we're also granting legacy email accounts to alumni.
Okay.
And so that process to get their username and, this kind of gets back into documentation. I've been the only person for nigh on 6 months doing all of this.
Yeah.
So I have the script down. Thanks Dad for teaching me the NATO alphabet so I can do phone passwords over the phone like a pro.
Right.
Now we have a new guy and then now I'm having to communicate that. And it's things like that. It's also those users. It's just different user interactions each time.
If you're going to do a lot of that phone support, taking from a sales view a little bit, go like the telemarketer route, right? You said you have a script already written.
No, in my head.
You can't do it that way. You have to have it written down, right? So like from a telemarketer's route, what they do is everyone has like a script, and whenever someone makes a change to that script, everybody gets a new piece of paper with that script. And obviously there's blanks because not everyone's going to say, hi, my name is John. So if you have to obviously start your documentation process. Probably not here because of the Wi-Fi, because I want it to be, we didn't get it into our Prezi, so I want to say, get on a Google Doc as soon as you can and just start brain dump it and get it into paper, get it somewhere where someone else can read it. And that way you can pass that on to someone else because God forbid something happens to you, right? Obviously I don't wish harm on you, but if something happens, who's going to be able to do that?
Right.
Add on, and do you want to?
That's a great place for a Git repo even. Where you're committing into that space. That's just a text repository. And then you can have your staff edit it as well, and you can fork it that way and, bring your changes back in. Luis.
I just want to expand on your previous topic about, helping the users help themselves. And I very much propose the concept of tier 0, in that, if there is a number of things that users can do themselves. And in this case, it seems like a system that would automatically be able to provide them a password reset as opposed to having to. So that's the kind of thing you could look at building, for example. Where
build like a password reset website,
We do have a password reset website. That's not the problem. The two things is you either need, because it's higher ed, you have to confirm against records.
Okay.
It's
Right.
Even in higher ed, you also can't give the information to the parent. You have to give the information to the student. Have you ever tried to pin down a student these days, a high school student, who's in 5 different after-school activities, and they're on theater, and oh, by the way,
Is there something you can do? I don't know. I'm winging ideas because I'm obviously not in education, but is there something you can do where you can
a
do
Facebook direct message.
Yeah, like Facebook Direct, or like push it to their phone. Can you do like an APN to their phone?
No, because of our requirements, it has to be over the.
Yeah.
Well, then I am not the right person to ask.
We got wild and started using Skype. Let me tell you about that. Like, we have international student body.
Right.
We got.
Is there anybody else in the same educational level? I'm sorry, what's your name?
Lynn.
Lynn? Is there anybody else in the same educational level as Lynn right here? Like working that? You guys should talk.
Yeah.
I'll just add one more thing. That's a very specific example of that particular problem, but I work with a group at SFU, which is a large university in Vancouver, and one of the things that they had to do, for instance, is that they moved from an open Wi-Fi to a 802.1x based authentication. And so imagine getting everybody through the process of learning how to add 802.1x authentication to their machines when it requires a profile on a Mac or it requires other configuration on a PC. So they did go through the process of extensive documentation and usability testing and making sure people could read it. And it to the point where it's very self-service. Anybody can go on their website, find the information, download the profile, and within seconds you can actually do your 802.1x authentication to their Wi-Fi. And so that's a great example of, and I would say, I'll give you the link to their site so you can examine how they provided this documentation and how they built that, because that's a great example of just providing the brain dump, putting it down, having some usability testing, and just letting the users help themselves. Obviously the password issue is very specific, but.
Good question. Anybody else?
One in the back?
One of the differences I see in small IT versus big IT is that users love in a small IT having that one guy to go to. Often, whether it's a walk-up or a phone call in the hallway, or often they're co-located, and that's one of the things that they hate giving up when like a small department loses their IT guy and then joins like the larger IT organizations.
Sure.
And the larger organization has like multiple techs that they rotate out and everything. There's a lot more policies and things. Is there a way to make a larger IT organization kind of have the benefits of that smaller organization?
So yes, there is. Generally, what I would recommend in those circumstances is it's all how you train your techs to approach a problem. And what they really love about that guy isn't the fact that, hey, he roots for my sports team, although that helps. It's the way in which your IT interacts with your people. What they really liked is that he or she came quickly, fixed my problem, didn't push me out the way, gave me tools to solve the problem in the future. And that's something that you can teach. One of the things that I think is important is I have a humanities background. I'm a political science major and a vocal performance major. So it's one of those places where you can teach the computer stuff to the guys with the humanities. And you can teach the humanities side to the computer guys. And that's important because I think that that's the point at which you really start to develop a stronger IT department. The technical skills aren't the only skills you need to build in IT. You need to build the human interaction skills. And building your human interaction skills is really important. And so you start with your tier 1 guys. And it's not, I mean, at 8 a.m., of course, it's, yes, what's the problem? Because I haven't had my coffee yet. But that's true a lot of places anyway. So I was going to say, in those environments, I think that it's a strength of, you're seeing the benefits of someone with good human interaction skills, not necessarily a lack of technical structure.
The other thing is, like, in small IT, I always say that I'm my client's, like, psychiatrist. Because, like, I know about my clients' like kids' baseball games. Like, I can care less about the fact that he threw like the first strike, and like I don't care. I pretend I do, but like that's what small IT is. But actually, going on more on what you said, that book, The Phoenix Project, they talk about. There's actually an issue in that book where everybody in the company keeps calling this one guy in the IT because he's the smartest guy there, and the guy who gets promoted in the beginning has to figure out how, because he actually is the smartest guy there and he's the one who's also writing this code. He has to figure out how to get everyone to stop bothering him so he could actually do his job, right? Which becomes a problem when you have larger IT. Favoritism ends up being an issue. And they actually cover that pretty nicely. They actually just cut him off from the outside world and they tell everybody, like, tough noogies, you're not allowed to call him anymore. And like people are like, no, you feel like they kicked their dog. Like, it's like, but you can't let that kind of stuff happen. The idea is you have to spread the knowledge, spread the wealth. Because if you have that kind of favoritism, what happens is that one person gets so bogged down with reboot this, fix that, install this package, install Flash 17 times in one day, like whatever it is. And like, they never actually get their job done if they're tasked with something else. Yeah.
So I've done those kind of long sessions with my staff of here's a bunch of IT stuff about the computer environment that you should know, that you can use to help yourself. And that idea of breaking that up and putting it into other meetings at the end or wherever seemed real appealing. How do you get the buy-in and the interest at the end, though? Like, you just always make it interesting, but...
Yeah, you've got to focus on... telling someone how to find their IP address is the most boring thing in the world. I understand that. But if you couch it into the terms of, why is that important? So you go home one night and you get on your Wi-Fi. Crap, where'd my IP address? I can't get on the internet. So you're teaching them how to troubleshoot not just their office, you're teaching them how to troubleshoot at home. And it's how to better use your computer in all environments, not just yours. And so, I mean, you're not going to get buy-in from everybody. Some people are actively computer hostile. My favorite was we were doing support for a scholarship application. And there was a professor at a large public university in the state of California in the Bay Area. He was a history professor on the Industrial Revolution. And I got the mail, and the mail came in. It was in all caps. And it said that the internet was just a fad and that we weren't going to do things this way. Some people hate computers. It's true. And you may never reach that person. You're going to have to route around them as not going to be able to buy into your IT infrastructure. Not everybody's going to want to pay attention, but I'd say that there's a lot more interest out there than there is non-interest or active hostility. And you're going to have to learn to deal with the active hostility. And we've all been there. We've all had the screamer on the other end of the phone. And it's tough. And oftentimes it's really demoralizing. But the thing is that at the end of the day, you get to be the IT guy who tried to help, and they have to go home and be them. And that is your best revenge.
You have to take the moral victory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone had a hand up over here, other than Nick. I can see him over here. No, back there.
Sorry.
I just had a comment about the earlier question about how you sort of get people off calling their favorite guy, because I've had to deal with that a fair amount, and not necessarily having the position where I can just cut them off and say, no, you can't call that guy. But what we've done is sort of made it so there was some barrier to entry there to say, we can get that guy to give you a call back. It might take 5 hours. It might take 2 days. It's whenever he's free. Here's somebody that you can talk to right away. And that, I feel like, gets past some of the emotional attachment that people have. Because, if you just cut him off, some people get really upset.
Right.
But if they're like, no, he's still here. You can talk to him. He's just really busy. Sometimes that helps.
I mean, obviously, there's a scale, right? If, like I said, like when they cut him off in the book, people were like screaming hellfire. But in obviously that's a book. In real life, you can't get away with that. I mean, I've had people who, when I've had employees, and they call, and I always make them the first line of defense, and then he tries to help them, and then like inevitably I get an email from them like, this guy doesn't know anything, you have to come help me. And I'm like, no, he has to help you. Like, that's the point. You have to be able to just put up, it's what I was saying earlier, you have to draw the line in the sand, and you have to feel it out. Every customer is different, so you just have to know your audience.
Yep. Just in response to that suggestion, though, we've tried that also, and some people will, of course, do what you want them to do, is take the shorter route. On the other hand, I've come back from being away for a week and have had 6 people waiting. And they've been waiting most of the week. So they don't always choose the path you want them to take.
You know what? They clearly don't want to work. That's all it is. They clearly don't care about their jobs.
Louis says something to add about that.
And I think there's two sides to the thing, because clearly one side is the users and just getting them unattached to some degree, but also on the tech side, there are ways to remove the smart people from that first line of defense in ways that allow them to still be involved, but not just with the users. And one such example, and I don't know if university folks use Zendesk, but in the small business world, we use Zendesk for our ticketing a lot. And there is the concept of light help desk agents. Those light help desk agents cannot communicate with customers directly, but full help desk agent can escalate a ticket to that person and get that communication flow. So I think that one of the most valuable things to have in a help desk anywhere is that communication flow between tier 1 and the more smart people, so that they know that they can ask the silly questions and get the correct answer to the customer. Because the cowboy tier 1 help desk agents are the ones who create the problems with a lot of the customers, as we know.
Yeah. That's why whenever you call like cable companies, I'm always like, I'm a consultant. Can you just put me right through to tier 2? Yeah.
Well, just
Which I've done.
That's good. I like that. Just to respond and clarify, I'm thinking more in terms of a strategic thing that you do ahead of time, where you sort of systematically increase the length of time, even when the person's not away.
Well, that's good.
To say, like right now, the person might get back to you in a few hours, and for the people who are a little more persistent, you sort of extend that time and put up more barriers, make it a little bit more difficult, just to.
That's sneaky.
Yeah, I have to be sneaky.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Do you want to go to Nick?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. I mean, there's a point at which it's like everything in IT, this is a balancing act. And there's going to be the point where the 6 days, I just hired someone else. And they can learn my whole IT environment in 6 days, and they're just as nice. That happens. Don't let yourself fall into that position unless you have to.
The 2 things I've found working frontline, and now I'm kind of not first tier, I'm 1.5 tier, is there's 2 things that you can, and I lost one of them, but the first thing you can always ask somebody if you're having problems with soft skills, if you're having a user who's frustrated, the best phrase I ever thought of was asking, how's the family? Because it instantly gets them talking, it distracts them. We use Bomgar. And I am a Bomgar ninja. And it kind of just lets me poke around and get all the information that I need. And there was another one, and then I completely lost it.
If you ever go to like a client's desk and you see like a picture of their kid, it's like, oh, how old is your...
Well, not even that, but how's the family? Because every single person kind of has a contextual concept of what their family is.
Right.
And so even if they don't have, like, I don't have kids, but the cat was running around the house at 2 a.m. last night. I'll share.
Yeah, and the thing is that we want this, it's a human interaction. We are interacting with humans. It is helpful if you think they are on your team. And that can be a simple question like, what you doing this weekend? Or how was your weekend if it's earlier in the week? Or, I was going to say, how about that local sports franchise? And, I was going to say, that's a jokey.
Like that. It doesn't really work.
No, it totally does. It totally does. It totally does work to say, how's that local sports franchise? Because you know that you're trying to break the ice and you're trying to break up that environment a little bit. And that really does help.
How is them local rugby players?
Are these response comments or are they new questions?
I've actually, that kind of is a response.
Pass it on over there.
This is more something that applies to big IT, but one of the magic phrases I've learned, because it helps the customer feel better, but at the same time it's a little sneaky for me, is that whenever I'm done fixing their problem, I say, while I'm here, is there anything else I can help you with? Because this serves two purposes. One, 9 times out of 10, they're like, nope, I'm good. And then they think to themselves, I'm fixed.
Yes, I'm good.
I'm good.
Yeah, because it's again, we've talked about that known good state. This has, solving their problem takes them back into that known good state at which they start being productive again.
The problem
because they don't think their computers.
They just start crying.
But if you ask them, is there anything else I can do for you? And they say, yes, you're there. You can fix it. Well, hopefully. You can fix it.
Right.
And then you've just saved yourself hopefully another ticket, maybe 2, maybe 3.
Yep.
And it saves you having to walk back. It saves you having to follow up. It saves so much time to just be like, I'm here. Do you have a problem aside from the one you reported?
Right. Because I can't tell you how many times I get called into a medium or large size client and I'm there to fix this. And then it's always, oh, can you help me with the copier? Can you help me? I can't get through on VPN. I'm having trouble with this wiki server thing. And you're like, ooh, I see. And you can't fix problems you don't know about. And that's the step.
I got two going both ways. So one, you said follow up. Something we didn't talk about was following up. In small business, follow up is like massively important. And I tend to drop the ball as much as possible on this one. I just do, whatever. But if I fix like a large enough problem, I'll follow up. Or if it's a client that I know that's kind of a little like on edge with the issue, I'll like after I fix it, I'll let a couple days go by and I'll send a quick follow up like, everything's still going good? Great. Hope you have a great weekend. Right. And I kind of try to cut it off at the pass before it comes back up. So follow-up is a big thing. And then the other thing you said was, when you're there, at least for me, because we have monthly maintenance clients, my monthly maintenance contract says, you can call me whenever you want. I don't care. But we're going to have one scheduled day. And that one day I'm here. Because inevitably, when I show up, people are like, oh, crap, you're here? This is broken and this is broken. I'm like, why don't you call me, man? But I go there and I can just kind of nail out all these things. And guess what? Then they don't call me for like a month. And it's glorious.
Yeah. Nick had a question, if you want to pass the mic there.
Sort of on the same topic, we had to sort of scale up very quickly from small IT to big IT because we built another school. We bought 500 more devices. And so my boss, who was just recently hired a couple of years back, realized that having a sort of more egalitarian approach that you see in education where everyone treats the IT people as sort of a public service utility doesn't really work on a large scale anymore. So he borrowed some ideas kind of from a more corporate approach where the IT department, which was 3 and is now 7 people, he says, okay, look, everybody has a specific job. Don't send an email to the whole support team saying, it's broken, fix it. Find the person whose job it is to help you. And he's also taken away our responsibility to educate users and put the users in charge of educating users. Because, especially in schools, you've always got some people who are just really smart. People who really love their computers, they're power users. They install all the software and do all the cool stuff. Have them lead the sessions. And we've discovered that since we started having these power users become the new tech leaders, teachers in general are more responsive to people they perceive as their peers than people they perceive as, these are the tech guardians, the gods who rise above us.
Users are like other teachers?
Yeah, they're other teachers.
So absolutely.
Teachers who have more experience in, okay, this guy's really good at using Keynote. He'll tell everybody else how to use Keynote in the classroom.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's been great.
Taking advantage of your skill leads, and because that's what you've got. You've got skill leads all over the place that you don't even know about sometimes. And using those internal resources may be bad for internal billable hours, but it's better for your user, and that's what matters. And sometimes they need to hear it from someone who is not wearing an IT badge. And that sucks. And that goes back to the Nick Burns problem, and that goes back to the CEO is demanding that I do X, Y, and Z to, save us from getting lawsuits. Because we get to be the bag man at that point. We're carrying the baggage for the CEO. And that sucks sometimes. But if you can reroute around it by finding good outside IT department resources, that's your goal anyway. Even if you have to step out of your comfort zone and into somebody else's department space, you're doing it to get the job done. And your final goal is happy users that don't break stuff. Or that, break stuff in a minimal way. Because then you get to go have a beer.
All right, we have 30 seconds. Any
Time
last
for one
questions?
really fast question. You guys are awesome.
Great.
This is my first presentation at a conference ever. So you guys made this awesome. Thank you.